Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Joel Bryce, and welcome to another episode of Delta Waterfowl's The Voice of the Duck Hunter podcast. In today's episode, we're discussing one of my favorite topics, hunter recruitment, retention, and reactivation. You'll often hear this referred to as R3. When we talk about affecting hunter numbers through programs or policy initiatives, we talk about the entire life cycle of a hunter, recruiting new hunters, retaining existing hunters, and reactivating those who once hunted. Delta's hunter recruitment, retention, and reactivation programs are cleverly covered under the umbrella name Hunter 3. To set up today's discussion, I'll use a duck hunting analogy. As waterfowl hunters, we certainly value time afield, sunrises, sunsets, dog work, time with family and friends. But the ultimate prize boils down to harvesting birds. As a year-round passion for many, we invest in and refine our equipment. We adapt our techniques to tip the odds of harvesting birds in our favor. When on an actual hunt, we don't dump our decoys into a pile and hope it works. We do things intentionally and thoughtfully, all with the hope of harvesting birds. This same concept applies to R3. If you decide to take a potential new hunter afield or volunteer your time to support an existing R3 program, like Delta's First Hunt program, of course you want to create a fun and enjoyable experience. But the ultimate goal is to recruit and retain new hunters. This episode it'll focus on helping you create the proper mindset so your personal R3 efforts will have maximum impact and help secure the future of hunting in North America. If you're looking for a quick read, let me point you to an article written by Delta Waterfowl's editor, Paul Waite. It's titled Hunter Recruitment, Are We Doing It Right? Type that into your Google search engine and you'll find the article. Much of what we'll discuss today is at least mentioned in this article. Switching to today's guests, to help me cover this subject, we have two great guests who spend a great deal of their time recruiting adults into the outdoors. We have Mark Norquist and Leigh Neisel of Modern Carnivore. How you doing, guys?
Doing well.
Hey, Joel.
Awesome. It's a pleasure. You guys are in Minnesota, both, right?
That's correct. Yeah, I'm down in the metro and Leigh's up north.
Awesome. Well, I'm of course here in North Dakota. So I want to do just a little bit of introduction about how I see Modern Carnivore, which I see is pretty cool. But throughout the podcast, I'm going to ask you both to talk more about Modern Carnivore, what you stand for, what you do, and where you direct your efforts. But I want to read a quote that I grabbed from your website that to me says a great deal about what Modern Carnivore stands for. And so this is word for word. In today's world, we've become increasingly disconnected from the true sources of food. Modern Carnivore is reconnecting people to healthy meat options and introducing them to a lifestyle of direct harvest that includes foraging, fishing, and hunting. And I think this is my favorite part, which kind of speaks to today's podcast. No experience required. So to me, I just love that. And it says a lot about what you're doing. Do you guys agree with that? Obviously, Mark, you probably wrote that, so it speaks to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of what was my intent in creating the platform is creating opportunities for people who might be interested in learning about those activities, hunting, fishing, and foraging, but don't have a background in it. Maybe they grew up in an urban environment. Maybe they grew up with parents that didn't go outside and do things in the outdoors, or any number of factors that could have precluded them from having it as a childhood activity. And traditionally, people have been overwhelmed by the barriers to entry if you're an adult. You know, people will generally say either I grew up with it or I didn't. And you're in one of those two camps. That's why I like to say we have hunters and we have not yet hunters, rather than putting those camps in place of hunters and non-hunters, which seems like there's a wall between them. So yeah, breaking down barriers and no expense or experience necessary.
I love it. I love it. And we're going to get to know each one of you individually before we jump into all the meat and potatoes. Mark, we're going to start with you. So I'm just going to call you a cool dude. All right.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
All anybody needs to know. I met you for the first time. I think it was 2 years ago this last summer.
That sounds about right. Yeah, I
About
think so.
right. I knew of you before I met you, but I think, Leigh, we've probably all run into this where you meet somebody for the first time and there's just some natural synergy. And I just kind of found that with Mark, and I think maybe it's that Midwestern in me, the Wisconsin
Well,
native.
I had the same experience with Mark. I think I met him over a blueberry bagel in line for breakfast. And it was just like a natural sort of attraction, and we just hit it off talking about the things we love the most, and that happens to be hunting.
That's cool. That is cool. Mark, can you take some time? Let's bring in the listener into your life. Tell us about you personally, Mark. Where are you from? Give us a 60 or 120-second overview of Mark, the guy, but then talk about you professionally after that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like so many people who are probably listening to this, I grew up hunting and fishing and doing a lot of the outdoor activities. Grew up in north central Minnesota with a father who took his three boys out, and we did outdoor stuff all the time. It was just part of our lifestyle. And so it's something that's always been a personal passion. But then professionally, I know I've listened to this podcast in the past, and you've had people on talking about their professional life going into either, well, both of you are a great example, going into either biology or forestry or conservation, generally based on a lot of those hard sciences. I actually went down a different path professionally and came to the outdoors late on the professional side. And that was, I, for many years, did marketing and media work. And got to the point where about 10 years ago, where I said, maybe there's a way to combine my personal passions with my professional work. And so I looked at how I always used motivation strategies and psychology theories to create affinities for people to brands, Toyota, Bank of America, those types of big brands, and instead said, how can we use a lot of that discipline around social sciences and apply it to something that I think is really important, which is getting more people into the outdoors doing these activities that I love. So created Modern Carnivore about 10 years ago, and then about 6 years ago left the whole corporate life and went full-time into doing my own work.
So, question, are you happier now, Mark?
I'm a lot busier and it's stressful, but absolutely. I mean, it gets to the philosophical perspective of what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to chase the dollar and try to work to get to that retirement marker and set that marker as close to today as possible and hope you get there, and then live the quote unquote good life? Or are you instead going to hop off the train tracks and say, you know what, I'm going to chart my own course. It's going to be hard, but it's something I'm passionate about. And now I'm living every moment of the day. And you don't have work life that is completely disconnected from personal life. It's just life. And so it's very challenging on all levels, but it's very rewarding, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Well, welcome. I don't know, Leigh, high quality of life in your line of work, I'm guessing?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't trade it for the world. I get to spend every day outside in the place that I love the most. So it's a great way to live life. Keeps me active, keeps me young.
That's right. So share with our listeners a little bit about who you are, Leigh, personally, professionally.
Sure. Well, just like Mark, I grew up in a rural community in southeastern Wisconsin, with a father who took his daughter along hunting. I think I was probably 7 or 8 years old when I first started going to deer camp. And in Wisconsin, deer camp's like religion. You can't miss deer season. And so I grew up in that environment and decided to go to school for forestry. And I was lucky enough to be included by a lot of my peers in learning about hunting and taking the opportunity to go out and put myself out there, to gain experience, to have those exposures. And, that led me even farther north. And now I'm here on the North Shore of Lake Superior, where I live in the most beautiful place in the world where I have countless opportunities to harvest ducks, grouse, woodcock, hare. I mean, the list could go on and on and on. What I do in my personal life, and while my professional life helps feed that beast, I guess you could say, because I know all the great spots to go hunting, and I'm fortunate enough to make all the habitat that those critters like to live in. So, I have a very unique spot here, and in what I do professionally and personally, and it's a great place to live. And I'm really happy to be here and be involved with what Mark's doing. And there's, wishes on my future horizon that I can do exactly what Mark's done with his life, and not chase the dollar, but chase something that's a little deeper and more meaningful and purposeful for the direction of my life. Yep.
I think we're all here for the same reason, which is I feel the energy. So no,
Absolutely.
So Mark, you're the founder of Modern Carnivore, and I think on your website, in addition to founder, you're the editor.
Yeah, you wear a lot of hats when you you start something. So yeah, I mean it's a small organization, and Leigh is one of the lead volunteer outdoor mentors, which is part of the education work we do, where we're working to help bring new adult hunters down the pathway of learning, and that's both studying things, like we do a lot of video based learning, but then also making sure people like Leigh and other mentors in our community are there to answer questions when somebody isn't familiar with shotguns or blind setups or whatever the issue may be. But yeah, I wear a lot of hats. So I host one of the podcasts. We have two different podcasts. I do editing of the blog, publishing of different aspects of the platform. So it's you get to be chief bottle washer, and you get to clean the toilets and do everything when you create a business like this.
Well, we need to. I kind of mentioned this before. Related, Mark. Maybe we should have your wife on the podcast.
Yeah.
To teach everyone how they can support their spouse, like being constantly busy in your day job and your night job. That's amazing that you're able to accomplish so much.
I want to take Mark's wife hunting. That's what I want to do.
And exactly, and she's going to. I think she will be heading up north with Leigh at some point.
I hope so.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Joel, it to your question earlier, was it the right choice, and are you enjoying it? Absolutely. But it is literally 24/7, 365. It is, when you're launching new offerings, when you're managing the community, there's something to do at all times. And so you better love it. You better really enjoy that aspect of it. And that's where, not only is it exciting to see a business grow, but with something like this that has real purpose and mission behind it, every time you see the light bulb go on for a new adult hunter and they go, I get it now. Those are the exciting moments that are the payoff that make you go, yes, we're having impact. We're making a difference. And therefore it keeps you moving, keeps fueling the passion and the energy needed to go.
It's always enviable, and I feel really lucky to have you both on the podcast, because you do have a passion for both of you. Mark, you could stick with your day job. You could never have, worked on that marketing business. Leigh, you can focus on being a forester, do your own hunting, but you're doubling down on your passion. And I think, I see that, I hear that, and I think our listeners will too. So thank you both again for being on the podcast. Throughout the podcast, there's going to be subjects where I please bring up Modern Carnivore's programs, offerings, website, what people can find. At the end of this, I want to make sure that people understand the inner workings or how they can interact with Modern Carnivore.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So to kick it off, so we're talking about R3, recruitment, retention, and reactivation of hunters. So I don't know about you guys, but when we post on social media or in our magazine or something, talking about let's make more hunters, invariably there are comments, probably dominate the comments. We don't need more hunters. It's already crowded where I am. You don't live where I live. And I'm just going to take the skunk in the room or the elephant in the corner. Let's put them right on the table.
Wow.
I absolutely do not discount that viewpoint because it's a personal viewpoint. And if someone listening to this podcast or reading an article or, perusing the Modern Carnivore website, that may be what jumps into their mind. There's no way. And we'll share some stats, can't argue with them. But if you feel that where you hunt or where you live is crowded, guess what? It's crowded. It just is. And this is a whole nother podcast, a whole nother subject, but there's a combination of variables that quickly come to mind for me. There's loss of access to private land through leasing, development. In the South, from a waterfowl perspective, there's been huge changes in rice farming practices that have eliminated thousands of acres of water from the landscape during the hunting season. So guess what? What's left? You're going to feel, in some parts of the country, you're going to feel crowding. So the last thing I want to do there is discount it. At Delta, we work on initiatives to add access, add acres of land to hunting access. Mark, I know you're super involved in backcountry hunters and anglers, and the main pillar there is public land, maintain, add, for outdoor recreation, not just hunting, but for everyone. And so, we're just going to address that one head on. Do you guys hear that? Do you receive that type of feedback at times, or Leigh, is that a surprise to you?
Well, you have to remember where I live. So it is kind of surprising to me because I could walk a lifetime here and never walk the same path twice. So I never feel crowded here. But I do live in the land of public land. I mean, the northeast portion of the state here is primarily public. So I'm fortunate, I guess, compared to those places you were just listing off. So I welcome people to come up here. I welcome people to come enjoy their public land. Albeit, yes, it's a barrier. It's sometimes a long distance for people to travel here. And the wild places that we live are intimidating too to people. There's not cell phone coverage where I live. So I guess it is a little shocking to hear people feel crowded in public lands. So
Yeah, and it could be, Mark, I know you waterfowl hunt, and Leigh, you waterfowl hunt too?
I do, yeah.
I hunt everything, so I love it all. Why choose one? But Mark, maybe it has something to do with waterfowl hunting, where it's maybe it's a much more restricted type of habitat that people are seeking out. But for certain, in the waterfowl world, we do hear a lot of, "Hey, it's crowded. Where are people going to go?"
Yeah, I mean, I think there is the reality of it, and I think it is more prominent within a waterfowl culture where you just logistically look at the mechanics of waterfowl hunting is very defined seasons with a big emphasis on opening weekend and limited access points to the best habitat around. And so therefore you get to the boat landing where you're going to drop your duck boat in, and it's at 2 in the morning, 1 in the morning, it's backed up with 15 trucks already down on the Mississippi. That's what happens. So the opposite, even though we're in the same state here, Leigh's up in the Arrowhead region. Now, obviously not as much of a duck hunting destination, but you come down to the metro area, you want to head down to Louisville Swamp, or you want to head over to the Mississippi, you go out opening weekend, and it is, like I said, backed up. I have friends who head out at midnight and are behind the 8 ball to get out and find their spot. And so that is exactly like you said, Joel. I mean, that is reality for those people in those locations. That being said, my response whenever that's brought up is that is a challenging situation, but it is anecdotal evidence that is in a very specific place. If you look at those larger trend lines, and Joel, you know this very well, you're studying this all the time, there's dramatic decline. And so, while we have personal challenges with those factors, like you said, of declining private land opportunities, In other situations, I would say declining habitat and quality habitat. Here in Minnesota, we've seen the whole, flyway shift west, and we've got very limited opportunities compared to what there was 50, 75, 100 years ago. Um, and so it's just important for us to put it in the context, I think, of that larger trend line, which, if it continues, means that the next generation, our kids or our kids' kids, aren't going to have a whole lot of influence when it comes to policy and other things, if we don't turn it around to get more people out there.
Couldn't agree more. So I want to share some stats, and you both have probably heard these before, but I'm going to share some stats. They're both from reports published in 2016. One is from the Council to Advance Hunting and Shooting Sports, and it's titled National Hunting and Shooting Sports Action Plan. The other one is a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service report. It's titled National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation. And I believe that one comes out every 5 years. So it gives a nice, a half decade glimpse at how the world is changing. The numbers are not a joke. So if you go back to 2011, 13.7 million hunters in the United States. You look at 2016, 11.5 million. I'm going to do my math right off the top here. 2.2 million fewer hunters over that 5-year period. It is a trend that continues. It only tells part of the story. So if you're looking at hunters as a percentage of the entire population, it actually gets a little scarier, because Mark, you said it, and Leigh, we're losing our voice. And so if you look at hunters as a percentage of the population, in 1991, 7.3% of adults in the United States hunted. By 2016, it had declined to 4.4%. But over that same time period, the US population grew by 30%. And so even if we stay the same, we're going to decline as a percentage of the population. Our voice will diminish. And looking at US waterfowl hunter numbers, we've been cut in more than half since the 1970s. And so to me, it's inarguable that hunting's on the decline. It is. That doesn't mean that everything we said before isn't true, that people don't experience that crowding. And so it's a real issue. And we're going to spend the rest of the podcast kind of setting a perspective of, if you're going to participate in R3, if you care and you want to spend the time, if you have the time, what's your mindset? But first, I have lots of ideas. Leigh, what are some of your thoughts on why hunter numbers have declined?
Boy, we could spend hours talking about that. But I guess the first thing that comes to mind is this disconnect from nature. This focus that we have on screens, on computers, in our urban lives, it's drawn us away from the most natural places we've existed all along. And so I feel like there's a huge disconnect now between people in the natural world and what that natural world, has to offer. And if people would only take the time to discover what's out there, I think they'd throw the screens out and go out and paddle, hike, camp, fish, hunt, whatever their flavor would be. So I guess that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
I
agree. Mark, do you have any additional thoughts on that?
I completely agree with those. I mean, I generally, when I'm giving a presentation on this topic, I'll talk about what I would call the big three, which I think are overscheduling, urbanization, and distractions. And in distractions, I would put the technology into that bucket. And I think if COVID has taught us anything, it is that it's that we were all overscheduled. And now the problem is now we've all become more addicted to these screens. We're on them right now doing this, but it is a wonderful tool. But I think, like what I'm trying to do is use these tools of technology to say it's a great educational tool, it's a great connection tool, but put it in its place, limit its use, and then get outside. And I think when people, as we increasingly get more and more urbanized, I know you got a lot of stats. I don't know if you got anything about the urbanization trend line, but I mean, that's extremely dramatic also. And if you think about the impact of that on people's lifestyle, and specifically access, just take the access issue, to now have to drive further and live in a place where you don't just have that easy access to go out the back door with a 22 and go rabbit hunting. It's a very different world. And so we need to think about it differently and how we keep people engaged with the outdoors as they are more urbanized.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I lump everything that you both said into this term called urban drift. You can quote me on that. You can quote me on that.
I like it. I like it.
I hadn't heard it before, but to me, it speaks to just, genetic drift, urban drift. Like the world has just shifted more towards technology, more, and you said it, Leigh, more disconnected from nature, from the outdoors. And
Right.
let's do our best to reverse that. So if we're moving more towards helping our listeners develop a mindset, a perspective about what does it take to properly recruit a hunter, or what perspective should we have, or how do your efforts nest into the overall effort? I think the first thing that we need to do is acknowledge that the world is different. And we could be sad about that right now, but we could also be mad at the sun for being hot. It's not going to do us any good. And I think hunters, some call it apathy, where we only defend it when it's under attack or it's lost. But I think naturally, I'm going to speak for myself. I've said this since I was a little boy. Man, I wish I was born 200 years ago. Oh, I wish. And so we're always looking back to history. And R3 it's a modern grown up discussion, and the romanticism, I have to park it for at least this conversation. And then I'll go back to pretending that there's bison across the prairie out here in North Dakota. But it's really changed. It has absolutely changed. Ethnicity, the composition, ethnic composition of the United States, age structure, license age structure, all those things have changed. And so we really have to kind of, I think, develop that perspective. And so I'd like to break down the rest of our conversation into three kind of bigger categories. I want to talk a little bit about youth recruitment. And I know, at ModCarn, you don't focus on youth, perhaps at all.
No.
Right. And then I'd like to talk about adult-focused programming, and that's really getting into your wheelhouse. And I want to end with what I'll call underrepresented audiences. And so there we'll talk about ethnicity and gender. And I think Modern Carnivore also plays a prominent role in those categories as well, right?
Correct.
Okay. So when we're talking about youth, I call it, if you look back for decades, R3 isn't a new concept. It's a new name, but the act of recruiting hunters is not a new concept, or people to fishing or to anything. I think people have defaulted to youth programming. I want to recruit new hunters. Let's focus on kids. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's predominantly the recruitment programs that have been out there, youth focused.
Yeah. Leigh, how about you?
Well, until I met Mark, it's all been youth focus. So it's all I've ever seen since I was a little girl until now.
Right. Youth recruitment feels so darn good. It feels amazing, right? And also kids, let's call them, okay, hunters. I remember, I shouldn't say this. I caught a fish, a bass, a big bass in a lake in Wisconsin where I grew up. And I registered it for a fishing contest, but I put down an entirely different lake that I caught it in. And I strategically picked a private lake just to kind of stir the pot. I wasn't there. It's just that I knew people would be upset, that they saw it. But the point here is we're so protective of where we're going, of where, we invest all that time into a spot, fishing or hunting spot, and it's just not natural to share it until you start thinking outside of your own personal needs. And I think with kids, there's an aspect of youth recruitment that they're cute, they're cuddly, they can't drive, they can't get to my spot, and it's secure and it feels so darn good. And I think, when I talk about, there are ways to properly and effectively recruit kids to hunting? There absolutely are. But, some of the trappings of recruiting kids that I point out, you just have to understand the playing field. So if an individual came from a non-hunting family, they don't have a built-in mentor. And so that young person doesn't have time. They're in sports. They don't have money. They don't have a car. They're completely dependent on someone taking them. And if they don't have an aunt or uncle or grandparents or parents that hunt, that's why they don't hunt, most likely. And so if you take them in your program on a one and done experience and you send them back home, guys, what are the odds that they're going to continue on their own when they get back home?
0 to none.
0 to none.
Exactly.
Actually, I mean, I would say that there's the payoff is uncertain at that moment, right? They could graduate high school, go through college, get a job and say, wow, that experience was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed hunting and now I'm going to do it. But that could be a 10-year payoff. And that's a huge experiment. We don't have that amount of time to play with. And so here, our chapters, Delta Waterfowl chapters, they host a lot of local hunter recruitment programs. We call it First Hunt. And what we encourage our chapters to do, great. If you want to focus on youth, do it. Absolutely do it. But what we ask them to do or encourage them to do is to recruit the whole family. So there are entire family units that have never hunted, are interested in it. And so if you teach that family, wow, I think what a better activity could there be. We also have some chapters that have taken on what I call the Big Brothers, Big Sisters model. They pick one young person in their community and they stick with them for an entire year. They take them fishing, trapping, they take them hunting. And the hope is that by the time they choose the person for the next year, that young person is entrenched as a hunter and they stick on.
I think that's amazing. I'm one of the fortunate ones who had a parent who hunted. And if it wasn't for my father to invite me and give me the chance to come along hunting when I was a young girl, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. There's no way. So I think back to that experience and how revolutionary it was at the time for a father to invite his daughter to come to hunting camp. I can't ever thank him enough for what he did. And that's why I do what I do, and that's why you do what you do, to pass that along, that gratitude we have for those people in our lives. Mm-hmm.
I love what you said, Joel. That's really cool to hear about how you guys are evolving the programs, and specifically like the example of the Big Brother, Big Sister model. In that, I think one of the biggest problems or deficiencies of the past of a lot of the youth programs has been it's a one and done scenario. It's we had the Saturday and we took pictures and we posted the pictures out to our website, and we give ourselves a pat on the back and we feel good about it. But I think that the two primary characteristics that are flaws of that model are they're usually kids that are kids of parents who already hunt. So are we truly getting net new people into the fold? And then again, like you said, it takes a year, not a day. And so I love that model that they're picking one and just saying, okay, we're going to stick with this person for a year.
Yeah, there's a tremendous number of success stories coming out of the First Hunt program. We do have like I say, the one and done. We do have whole families being recruited into hunting. And a lot of times if a chapter holds a summer, we'll call it a waterfowl educational day, where come on in and, shoot a shotgun, learn about calling ducks, learn how to throw out some decoys. Those people that attended that event are the ones that are plucked, I guess. Sorry. They're plucked to participate in that fall mentored hunt. And so, trying to connect experiences to further that, because I don't know, again, it would have been weird for me not to be a hunter given my background, my dad, my grandfather, but it takes probably more than one experience for most everyone to feel that you're a hunter and that you can do it on your own.
Well,
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
that invitation, the over and over and over again, it's a welcoming invitation that you guys keep giving people, and that makes them feel welcome, that makes them want to come back. That's great.
You know, in the family thing too, that is something that I have personally seen from different people. We get calls periodically from parents who say, "Hey, my kid wants to learn to hunt and I don't. Can you take them into your program?" And I have to say no right now. The way our program is built is it is just for adults. Um, but there are definitely, and some parents don't want to do it. They're just looking for a program to get their kid into. But exactly like you talked about, I love that you're doing the family programs. And Leigh and I've talked about that in terms of some different things she's doing up in the Arrowhead region about looking at some opportunities to bring families up and to do whole experiences where everybody learns together. And I think there's real power in that. I love it.
Well, it's times are different, and I think we're all learning at the same time. There are license trends and research studies that the decline, studying the decline from a human dimension standpoint, that's kind of new science. And so everyone is learning. And again, one of the goals of this podcast and having you both on here is to share experiences, mindsets, philosophies. And if any of this rubs off on anyone, we'll consider it a good day.
Yeah, absolutely. The human dynamics of it. That's why I got into it. Like I was talking about earlier, with so many people focused on the hard sciences. My background in education is on the human dimension side of it, and there hasn't been nearly enough done on it. And so it's great to see that there is a lot of energy going on, and I think learnings like what you're talking about, which is critical to the future of hunting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, one thing interesting, there was a report that I was looking at, and it basically, the report was another survey, and it was repeated 2008, 2013, 2017. And it was basically, what are your most important reasons for hunting? And if you go back to 2008, if you just look at meat, for example, 22% called their most important reason for hunting meat. And in 2000, so 22%, and then it jumped to 35%, and then it jumped to 39%. And then, you know, if the primary reason was for sport or recreation, still a pretty high number, 33%, 31%, 27%. So that's on the decline. And so I think this is a great segue for talking a little bit more about Modern Carnivore, getting into that adult segment. So Modern Carnivore, eating meat responsibly. I love that little tagline. Kudos to you. But tell us a little bit, Mark, about the niche that you have selected, adult recruitment into the outdoors.
Yeah, that tagline, "Eating meat responsibly." When I went down that path, it was a bit of a controversial decision because if you're creating a brand, you want to draw people in with something that is, really cool, sexy, like, ooh, what is that? I want to be part of it. Being responsible isn't necessarily the coolest thing to do, but it draws people in because what it is years ago. So what I was working with a number of years ago with a lot of organic and natural food brands, and I was out at this conference in California, and I was walking the floor, show floor. There were like 3,000 vendors with all of these products out there, and a lot of them were grain-based, fruit-based, vegetarian, vegan items. And I said, I love this space because these companies and the consumers are serving are all about bringing these really healthy, responsibly sourced foods to market. But there's very little protein. So I started looking on the floor and doing some different things. Had prior to that started doing some different things with hunting from a marketing standpoint. I said, maybe there's an opportunity here because there's very few protein brands. There was like, Wild Planet tuna and a couple, and I think the Epic bar, which was the buffalo or the bison bar, was just coming out. But there were very few, and I thought, you know what? I think these people who have never been thought of before as potential hunters and anglers actually have the same underlying philosophy as a lot of people who hunt, which is, you know what, I love going out and getting the best organic, local, naturally occurring protein as I can. And so created the name Modern Carnivore to say, you know what, let's talk to the broader population that's interested in where their food comes from, and let's invite them into the world of hunting. And then it was a question of looking at, okay, what are the barriers to entry today? And it's like, whoa, gun issues, financial cost, cultural barriers, all these factors there. And so that's where then I started looking at and saying, how do I work to really knock down these barriers one by one and create that pathway for the not yet hunter to really learn about it. And again, to your point about a lot of times I'll talk about the challenge with kids is, or the beauty of adults and bringing them into hunting is they've got the money, they've got the mobility to drive a car, and they have the motivation because they self-select into it, as opposed to a kid who's maybe interested in themselves, but maybe the parent just said, you know what, I want you to learn about hunting, so I'm going to take you to this program. With adults, these are people who consciously thought about it and said, you know what, I want to go down this path about learning about hunting. And I have seen person after person come into this in amazing ways where I've seen literally in, let's say, 18 months, the competency of a new hunter surpass probably the majority of most hunters I know. Um, they just take it in and are studying and traveling and learning about butchering and are learning about cooking and are trying different recipes and experimenting. And they're not restrained by tradition of the past. They're just trying something out new. And so I think it's really exciting. It's this renaissance of new modern hunters. And so it's really exciting in my perspective.
So you're a Renaissance man.
I am a Renaissance man, absolutely.
Attaboy, attaboy. Leigh,
Mhm.
especially where you live,
Mhm.
I've often said that I draw two parallel lines. One of them are hunters, and the other one are people that may have more outdoor skills than hunters, but don't hunt. We're talking about people that camp or hike or mountain bike or mountain climb or snowshoe. I see those two parallel lines, and the key, and then this is your world, right? I'm guessing this is
Mhm.
your world, is if we can just get them to cross over.
Right. Right. I see where you're coming from. And I think this is another barrier that Mark and I have talked about a lot, is this reputation, this perceived reputation that hunters have, that we're out for the kill, or we don't harvest responsibly, or when it comes to carrying a gun, that's controversial for a lot of people. And so I think this perceived notion that a lot of that other crowd has kind of stands in the way of them coming over and testing the water. And so to break down that barrier, it's we have to be better as hunters. We have to do better. We have to be better. We have to put the example out there that we are doing this responsibly, and that we aren't just out there to take the game, but we also are out there being conservationists, and doing it responsibly.
You've both have witnessed that crossover moment. How would you, dip back into a memory and describe that experience, that awakening? Because the next thing I'm gonna talk about, Mark, I want you to talk about the series, the video series that you had. But Leigh, can you describe that awakening
Well,
moment?
yeah. So I got the chance to work with Becca, and she's in that video series, and I was her mentor at a Learn to Hunt camp was it 2 falls ago already?
Yeah, too.
Yeah. And there was this moment where it was like she was just carrying herself in a new capacity, like with confidence and self-reliance and independence. And, you know, I didn't have to have my hand on her back anymore. And it was her willingness to keep pushing herself and putting herself out there and willing to learn. And when the moment happened that she pulled the trigger and shot at her first bird all by herself, I mean, her eyeballs were wide. You could feel the adrenaline going. And I think I hooted and hollered more than she did because I was so excited for her. And and that was just the moment for me that I realized that this is why we do what we do, as mentors and as friends, as coaches, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're spending a lot of this time talking about the overall cause, but wow, those are the moments that those are the paybacks that justifies the long hours, getting up early, staying up late, just that magical moment watching someone else.
Hmm.
You know, there's so many different types of aha moments in the process you see. So we've done these events in the past called the Modern Carnivore Experience, which is a half-day introduction where we literally just sort of hyper pace someone through an introduction of the conversation about hunting. And we do presentations. We take them out in the field to try their hand at archery or shooting. They come back, they have a wild game meal, and then they have a conversation around the campfire about what their thoughts are. And there was one we did a couple of years ago where a woman who was a retired executive from a large Fortune 500 company here in the metro area brought her friend with, who was her yoga partner. Okay. And this woman said, you know, my husband hunts, I have friends who hunt. I've never done it. And I've always been curious about it. And so I brought her along. And you could see at the beginning of the day, through her body language, how she really was. If there was a thought bubble above her, it would be, "What the heck am I doing here at this hunting event?" You know, she's big city yoga partner friend. You know, and I think she's thinking, you know, I'm here for moral support. Um, we then go through presentations, and my friend Kyle Daly from U.S. Fish and Wildlife was talking about the history of hunting and going back into market hunting in the 1800s and how hunters were a big part of turning things around and the entire conversation ethic. Excuse me. And you could see her body language shift from arms crossed to inquisitive to truly leaning forward in her chair and really trying to take this in and get her head around it. And then after the event, we'll sometimes do interviews, and we just sat down with the camera and we said, you know, what was your biggest surprise today? And she said, I had no clue that hunting had anything to do with conservation. I thought you guys just went out and just took. And so those are the little things of where, and she said, it was funny. It was almost like couldn't believe these words were coming out of her mouth. She said, I think actually I maybe would be open to trying hunting. And she was almost, you know, processing it as she was saying it. But like, that's a little step that took a lot of work to get there, which was just an appreciation for and understanding what the hunting community is about, and that conservation is an integral part of what it means to be a hunter. And so like that, to me, like that comment there and that focus of that day was made it a success, just having that type of an impact with an individual.
I tell you, as a mentor, hearing stories like that and some of the questions my mentees have asked me, it makes me think twice about my own experience and how I think about hunting. And so it's great. It challenges me to be better. I think that's a great benefit of being a mentor.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. Mark and Leigh, I think Mark, you live on the edge of the Twin Cities. And so I tend to, when I think of the people that you're impacting through the in-person programming, I tend to think of big city people, big city adults. And I think maybe I unfairly stereotype that. Now, Leigh, where you live, that's not big city USA. You know, you're in the middle of nowhere, which is super cool. Do the rural participants, do they have a different perspective about hunting than Mark, maybe your big city people that come through Modern Carnivore?
Boy, that's a really good question. I think it's more normalized where I live.
Okay.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, it's more a part of our culture. There's a lot more community members participating in hunting and fishing, foraging, wilderness experience here, versus like where Mark lives, where it's not as normal to see your neighbor carrying his shotgun back, into the house after a long day's hunt. So I guess maybe it's a little more part of the culture where I live versus where Mark lives.
Less of a hurdle to get over, maybe where you live, Leigh.
Right, because we see it every day. I see guys out fishing on Lake Superior right now. It's every single day.
The beer signs in the gas station, all have a big buck on it or something.
Well, remember where we live. In Wisconsin, that's perfectly legit, but in Minnesota, there's no beer at gas stations.
Oh, that's right. Okay, sorry. Yeah, you got me.
I know it was a big change. It was a big change for me too.
So yeah, and so Mark, we've kind of jumped over a couple things here, and I guess I alluded towards it. Mark, I'm gonna turn it over to you. Tell people where they can find Modern Carnivore, and I think a lot of what we're talking about is it's well captured in that video series, the Awaken the Hunter Within. So tell people where they can learn more about this whole concept of adult recruitment and eating meat responsibly, and then tell us a little bit about your Awaken the Hunter series.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, they could go, if somebody wants to learn more about it, they can go to modcarn.com. If they go to modcarn.com/awaken, that'll take them right to the film series. And on there, if they go there, they can find the 2 different podcasts we've got. They can find the 7-part film. They can link over to the learning portal called Hunting Camp Live, and any number of different resources that would be good for new, but also we have a lot of experienced hunters that come. Like Leigh said, I find myself also in this process of doing the work we do, forcing myself to be better. I've got to learn and make sure I'm up to snuff on everything. And I think it's easy when you're doing it just for yourself to get comfortable in your routine. And when we have people, I'm coming on a podcast as a guest like this, or we're going out and doing different things. I've got to be on my game, and I've got to know what's happening. And so, there's a lot of resources there, and so Awaken the Hunter Within was a film that we shot 3 years ago. It was partially underwritten by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And as Leigh mentioned, one of the people on there was Becca, and the other 2 were Pierce and Alex. And these are all adults in their 20s and 30s who had never hunted before. And what we did was we followed them on their entire journey into the world of hunting, and said, let's document it and have the cameras follow them and find out what their questions are, what are they learning, what are the challenges, and what are their thoughts and perspectives. And so it's 7 different parts of the stage, going from an initial conversation I had with them, and then introducing them to mentors within the Modern Carnivore community who take them to the gun range, take them out squirrel hunting, take them deer hunting, etc. And so I think it is a good illustration, and what we're always trying to do, if we're not educating, we're trying to storytell. Really, I would, which can be entertaining or can be informative, but it's telling stories of new hunters and what their thoughts are. And that in and of itself is so enlightening. I can't ever go out and say, I know what a new hunter is thinking, because I've done it my whole life. All 3 of us, we don't have that perspective. So I love going out and asking those questions and finding out what people's perspectives are, so that we can continue to knock down barriers and create new opportunities. Like a good example of this, and an aha moment for me in the process of making that film was, when I originally started Modern Carnivore years ago, I always said, you know what, when it comes to, if we're introducing somebody to, let's say, big game hunting or any type of hunting, let's say, let's let's be careful on the field dressing side of things, because that could really turn somebody off. Um, and I think, a traditional model we always grew up with years ago was focus on the gun. You're going to get firearm safety. It's having fun of the gun. It's the thrill of it. And then maybe you talked about the field dressing later. With this focus on food now as a primary component and driver or motivation for hunting, um, we had Pierce going through this process where at the end of it, I said, Pierce, he didn't get a deer, but I said, what did you enjoy most about this? And he said, it was butchering the deer. So we had a deer from one of our mentors, Ben, who he had Pierce and Alex help him butcher the deer. And that was his favorite part of the process, was truly getting into a hands-on experience and understanding how this animal becomes food. And so that's something that I've ever since then. And actually, I think around that time, we started doing these butchering clinics. And so we did these butchering clinics just sort of casually in my garage, if I got a deer or I had access to a deer. And I'd invite people over, and they would have friends, relatives who would say, can I be part of that? I don't know if I'm going to hunt, but I want to learn about that. I want to see it. And so I think people are craving connection, transparency, and understanding of things that we have been outsourcing for years. The most
Mark,
important thing we all can relate to, food.
Mark, do you think that increases a person's gratitude as well?
Absolutely.
For the game that we take? Yeah, I think so
Ab-
too.
Absolutely. It increases gratitude for the game we take and for the food we eat. And that's the part of where, again, when somebody is taking the game from field to table, to freezer, wherever it is, that appreciation and valuation of it is important. We've gotten so lulled into a sense of thinking that factory farmed products that are, whether it's chicken or pork or what have you, at cents on the pound is the way that it was meant to be. And it's great to get stuff cheap, but it really should have a higher valuation on it. And whether that's time you invest in it or money that you pay out for it, it is eating meat responsibly.
That's a really good. So I do encourage everybody to jump out there and watch that series, because I think it's a great living example of some of the principles that we're talking about. Kind of listening to the interviews. It's quite. It gives you insight into a whole nother. Some people call it the adult onset hunter, and I've heard others say that sounds like a disease. Well, it is kind of a disease. Hunting is a disease I don't want to cure. But yeah, it's pretty awesome. So the other part, so I think what's jumping out here is that there are adult recruitment has certain advantages. So Leigh, Mark, myself, hunting was a hand-me-down tradition. In many, many households, what I think, just to summarize it, that tradition is broken. It's not occurring. It's not, the parents don't hunt, they're not handing it down to their kids. And so one way of looking at adult recruitment is, if you want to recruit kids, recruit the adults. So teach them to hunt, they'll teach their kids. Teach them before they have kids. And if they love it, they'll recruit their own kids. The other part is, the other take home is that adults coming into hunting for the first time may have a different value system than older and current generations of hunters. Less interested in sport, less interested, I shouldn't say, so I think most everyone loves the social aspect of hunting, but maybe that's not their primary motivator. The other part that I think, Mark or Leigh, let's turn to you on this one, Leigh. It's often said that the path to retention for an adult hunter is quicker than that of a youth hunter. Meaning, you take an adult, you give them a few resources, take them, they can probably continue on your own. How do you feel about that, Leigh?
I think that all comes back to what Mark was saying before, was the conscious decision by an adult to participate and be here, and the willingness to learn and keep coming back. Sorry, my dogs are barking.
That's all right. Mine's in the background, but he's sleeping.
Okay, I'm sorry. But yeah, I think that helps increase the success of adult retention is that they've made the decision to be here and they want to learn and they want to participate. And so I think that increases success versus that of a child.
I agree. And it's been stated that adults, I think another positive attribute of targeting adults is if self-help resources or self-learning tools are put in front of them, that could be their path to learning about hunting. Obviously, they need that trial experience, but an adult is in a much better position to teach themselves through learning tools. And so I know at Delta, we're in the process of creating a waterfowl hunting 101 course. It is a self-help course that people can take, graduate hunter education, take that class, and be in a much better position, much more knowledgeable to go on that first trial experience. You guys have something similar to that as well. Please speak to that.
Yeah, it's called Hunting Camp Live. So you can go to huntingcamp.live on the web and see it. Right now, we've got to focus on a signature course. We're putting all our energy around upland bird hunting, introduction to upland bird hunting, and it's around very similar to this work that you're doing, Joel. It's video centric learning, self-paced, where, as we say, wherever, whenever you want. But there's two sides to it, and that is the content that we're delivering, and that is the community that surrounds it. So, like as an example, you've got lesson 3, which has, I think, 8 lectures in it, which is each video based, is actually with Leigh, with Miss Neisel and her friend Bailey Peterson, and we're talking about navigation and safety out in the woods or in the field. And so here are a couple experienced hunters, and these are women who are out in the woods every day for their work. Bailey's a wildlife biologist, Leigh's a forester. And so doing video-based learning with bite-sized content delivered to the person. So the video is anywhere from a minute to 10 minutes long. And then the other component of the learning platform is the community that surrounds it. So we've got dozens of mentors, of which Leigh is one of our lead mentors. So somebody can go through this course. They're going to see Leigh talking about safety and navigation, how to use tools like compass, GPS, etc., and then literally can go out and ask a question that Leigh may answer, or another mentor within the community in private conversation. And that person may say, I'm from Nebraska, I'm not in northern Minnesota, and I want to get out pheasant hunting. Then we'll look to the network to say, okay, how do we connect you in with the right person? Or somebody's out in near Bismarck and they want to go duck hunting, and we're going to connect them up with Mr. Bryce. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to have each of those components. And that's where, again, it's utilizing the technology as a learning platform, but then focusing on how do you transition that into the community locally and out into the field, so you get people out there to really experience it.
Leigh, this is your primary intersect with Modern Carnivore, right?
It is. It is. Mm-hmm. And it was a blast making that video for Mark. And the one thing I really took away from it was learning how to communicate to adult hunters who have no experience doing what I do. So taking my knowledge, my skills, my abilities, and breaking it down into something that's deliverable and relatable was something I had to learn on the fly. But I think we made a really good product in the end that it's something that's approachable and makes people feel confident before they go out into the field.
Well, and what I would say, what I'll add to this is all of those mentors in there. Mentoring, Joel, this, it takes a certain type of person to do it. And one of the most important behaviors or characteristics in my mind is listening rather than telling. And that's another difference, I think, between kid programs and adult programs, is you need to adjust how you do it. Somebody may be a really good youth mentor to tell kids, here's how to do it. And it's primarily going to be based around safety and regulation issues. Whereas when you're mentoring adults, it's as much listening as it is talking. And it's finding out what are the motivations of that person for wanting to learn to hunt. And if you watch some of the videos that are out, we've got a video, there's, I think, a video on our YouTube channel of Leigh out with Becca, and you can just see in the field the way Leigh is working with Becca as an example on how she's interacting with her and providing that support, but also letting her go out and do her own thing. It's a very nuanced situation, and it's important that mentors know how to, again, listen to the new hunter and understand what their reason is for coming. So like a lot of times new hunters, they'll say, I don't even want to carry a gun. Or I'm going to carry a gun, but you know what? I don't know if I want to shoot it. So they just need to go through their own personal process. Everybody's going to be different.
Right. I think this is a moment where you need to learn their needs, their wants, their insecurities. And by listening, we gain that knowledge. And have to remember that this isn't our timeline, it's our mentee's timeline. And so that's something that's key in being successful and giving them the confidence to keep going.
That's very commendable. I don't get out into the field often enough with new hunters. I wish I did. And so there's a big part of me that's envious of your firsthand testimony or observations of that moment. And so please keep doing it. And everyone listening, check out, the Modern Carnivore platform, learn about these videos. And I'm guessing you're going to have the same response. Mark, you do a really nice job. I think an artistic, I'll call it maybe an emotional portrayal of the things you're talking about. So check that out. We're going to move into the next category. We're definitely not going to cover it in as much detail, but what we're trying to do is to just help everyone create a perspective. If you wanted, just as a reminder, if you're interested in investing your time in R3, we're trying to help shape a perspective, and whatever you choose to do after this, it's up to that's an individual decision. But I think the last category to cover is what I call the underrepresented audience. And so now we're talking about ethnicity and gender. And I've become the stats guy of this podcast today, so I have to live up to that reputation. So if you're going to stereotype hunting, you would call hunting a white male sport. You just would. And you really can't argue with it. If you start looking at the stats, 94% of today's hunting population are Caucasian. 89% is the last stat that I could find. 89% are male. Do the math, 11% female. So hunters do not make up the cross-section of America. We shouldn't apologize for that, but we should definitely open our minds, incorporate that perspective. Because here's the deal. Hunting has been declining in the white male world. It's been declining. So I'm of the opinion that if we want to continue down that path, and if we don't open our minds, this is where I say there'll always be hunting. It's just someday we'll call it poaching, right? It's
right. Absolutely.
What we're facing as hunters, whether we want more hunters in our duck marsh or not, or our deer woods or not, we're facing this moment where we are becoming increasingly irrelevant in the context of a continental population. And so we need to open our minds. Younger generations they have different perspectives than my generation. I'm 46. I've read some papers, I've heard discussions that people from different ethnic backgrounds, what they see in modern sporting media, that may alienate them. That may serve as a barrier, that their reason to hunt culturally could be different than the white male reason for hunting. Do you guys have any thoughts on that, born from experience?
Leigh, do you want to tackle it, or I can?
You go first.
It's a sensitive one in a lot of respects. And I say this from the standpoint of, you alluded to it earlier, Joel. This is an issue that is core to something that we're tackling at Modern Carnivore and have since the start. You know, we say in our mission statement, we respect each person where they're coming from. That includes their ethnicity, their culture they were born into, et cetera. And if you look at the data, it shows exactly like you said, as I've seen, and actually, I think that the stats you have about, I think if you actually break it down into those who only hunt, not hunt and fish, it's even higher. I want to say it's like 96, 98% white male. And so, as demographics of our country change, if we want to continue to be relevant, we need to bring people in of different stripes, and not have it be what it was in the past. And like you said, it's not apologizing for it. It's just the reality of what it was. And we're going to look for different ways to invite people in. And that is where, um, to get to the aspect of hunting culture and what it is. I think generally speaking, as much as we had a culture of it in the past, all three of us were raised with it from our parents, our families. It was still a very individual sport that was exactly like what you did, Joel, with throwing the scent off your trail to another lake when you got that big bass. Is I'm not going to tell people where I got this, and I sure as heck I'm not going to bring somebody there. So we got all these barriers to ourselves inviting people in. But now when you bring in a component of diversity, unfortunately, it gets very emotional for different people, because they I think a lot of times turn it political. I had it happen. I pushed out a podcast I recorded 2-3 years ago. I pushed out last summer, and it was called Hunting for Diversity. And it was with two people that I had a conversation with out in Utah a couple of years ago, and they were both Asian descent, but one is Canadian, one's American. And they were talking about the challenges they have in hunting, whether it's going into a sporting goods store and the way they're treated or other things. And I said, let's have a conversation about that. Uh, and I got hateful comments, unfortunately, on that post out on social media saying, quit pandering to the left, and again, turning into a political thing. And one of the people actually was a political leader from Iowa, not to dish on Iowa. You guys are Wisconsin, Minnesota. We can do that. Or it's sport,
Right.
a good sport, right? Um, and I sent him a message, and I said, I'm sorry that you are taking offense to this, but this is the facts, the reality, exactly the numbers you just threw out, Joel, in terms of here's the predominance of white male in the hunting community, and here's what it is as the percentage of the population and in decline. So we need to change what we're doing. And I said that out publicly, and he replied privately to me and said, okay, I understand what you're saying. I guess that makes sense. And I wish he would have said that publicly, because that's where the conversation was occurring. And why he felt that he couldn't say that publicly, I think is troubling. Um, but absolutely, we need to. So I guess long story short, of answering what you had asked, hopefully I'm getting at it, is it's it's something that needs to be discussed. It's just the reality of the facts, and we need to be more welcoming to anyone and everyone when it comes to hunting, whoever they are.
Agreed. Leigh, I'm going to state the obvious. You're a female hunter. How do you feel about the need for, or the let's call it an opportunity to diversify? And I'm going to set you up.
Okay, set me up.
There are more women, percentage-wise, I guess, and population-wise. There are more women than men in the United States. Let's call it North America. And I'm going to make a statement that I can't back it, but I did read it once, that if mom hunts, kids are more likely to hunt. And so as a female hunter, give us your perspective on the need to diversify.
Well, what kept coming to mind as I was listening to Mark right now is, this is my experience. It's been this way my whole life. Like, I've been fighting to become an equal. And now I'm seeing the opportunity for women to enter hunting or angling or foraging as equals, which is super exciting for me. And so I guess, it makes me reflect upon the barriers I've had to overcome as a female hunter, and what's out there, self-doubt, and the other barrier of how masculine hunting seems to be, and trying to bring my femininity and not lose that in sight of who I am and what I'm doing. And so these are some of the barriers I've had to overcome myself. And I see the need for the hunting and angling community to open their arms to all people. In being a female, I mean, it's I wish there were more women out there wanting to be role models for young ladies and young men. And I see the need that kids look towards mom and dad, but if mom comes along, the kids are certainly coming along. So I see that stat wherever you read it to be certainly true. So trying to make this more of a family tradition or experience is, something that seems to be super important and could be a focus for the future for both organizations.
I agree. And some of your videos on your website speak to this as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah, to inclusion, absolutely. And a lot of times we'll do it more subtly, in terms of just showing people and sharing the stories of people, whether they're of different ethnicity, whether they're women, and highlighting those stories so that, what we're trying to do with the platform is have anyone and everyone go, oh, that person looks like me. So I could do that. And that's unfortunately what too much of the traditional media, I think we've just, rested on the laurels of it looking like you and me. We've got within the upland bird hunting course, lesson 5 is a whole conversation on ethics, on hunting ethics, with my friend Rob Johnson, who is African American, who is a board member of the Ramsey County chapter of Pheasants Forever here in Minnesota. And so again, we're just always trying to show people of all types that are successful, experienced hunters, and as well as share stories of new hunters. We're going to be pushing out a podcast next week for with Rennell Lynn. Rennell, who is grew up in Minneapolis, never hunted before, went and got his first deer this last fall. And my friend Eric Jensen is his mentor. And how it happened was, you talked about it earlier, Joel. What can people do? Start a conversation with somebody. Tell them you're a hunter. Ask them if they'd ever be interested. Eric literally was doing something. I think he was getting pork fat to make sausage or something like that at the co-op. And Rennell's is a butcher in the butcher shop. And Eric just asked him one day, he said, "Hey, you ever gone hunting?" He said, "No, never have been." "Well, I got to tell you about it, and I got to tell you why I love it, and then I'm going to invite you out." And he took him out this last fall on a backcountry deer hunt in Minnesota. Like, they hiked back about a mile into public land, and then he got a really big doe, and they had to drag that thing out of there. And Rennell just had a great time. So I went over when they were butchering it, helped him butcher a little bit, and we recorded a podcast. And so, yeah, it's just elevating those stories of people that didn't grow up with it, that are new, that don't look like the typical, and making sure it's welcoming.
If we're looking towards the future, which we are, if we're looking to secure the future of hunting, I think we strongly believe that, and I think we've beaten this horse into submission, but hunters, to be more secure in the future, we need to be more diverse than white male. And again, there's stats. I guess it's the scientist or biologist in me. I don't know. I'm just driven by stats. And so I found, Generation Z, I think I mentioned to you guys before the podcast started, that's the name for the new generation. They're born 1996 or later. And if and this particular graphic it showed the percentage of each age group, what percent were white and of various ethnic backgrounds. And the one that jumped out, because we're talking about hunters as white men, and so I'm going to focus on the percentage of Caucasian in each of these generations. So Generation X, that's me, 46 years old. 70% of Gen Xers are Caucasian. If you jump into the one that gets talked about the most, millennials, they're 61% Caucasian. And you jump into the new generation, again, the oldest in that generation is 23. 52% are Caucasian. And so the world is changing. We need to change, be more accommodating. It's even stated that by the year 2026, Caucasians will drop below 50% in that Generation Z. And so we do need to look, we need to understand, and we need to adapt our programming, our efforts, maybe our own personal philosophies about the way things have been or should be.
Yeah, I think so. And I think people, if they can get comfortable with when you say that, I think it makes people nervous when you talk about changing perspectives. And I think as long as people understand we're not talking about foundational principles, those are timeless. I think when it comes to conservation, when it comes to ethics of hunting, when it comes to safety, when it comes to all of those factors. But what we need to be open to is more of the superficial stylistic aspects of it. Maybe it's different. I mean, you think about how set in our ways we are. The story I often give about how I have made my own mistakes when it comes to inviting people in. I had a cousin years ago who invited his friend to our deer camp. Big no-no. Uninvited. I mean, this was not a conversation that was had or anything. It was suddenly he had a friend showing up. And this was in the 80s, and he showed up with moon boots on. And you guys know, you do not wear moon boots out in the deer stand. So something as dumb and as superficial as that, was looked at. The footwear of the guy discounted him as a good new entrant into hunting. So I think I think we do need to just check at the door a lot of our predispositions of the way we do stuff.
Right.
I agree.
Well, unfortunately, I think it still is happening, and it might not be superficial, but I show up and I'm a woman and I still get questioned. You're a hunter? You have a shotgun? You have hunting dogs? I mean, it's still part of our culture, and something that I still have to deal with more than I should.
No, I bet, and I think the same, what we're not telling people is that they have to hunt differently.
No.
I say you be you, and
exactly.
hunt the way you want to do what you want to do. This is not saying be a different hunter, be a different person. It's just opening your mind to a different perspective. Maybe that means you're more accommodating. Maybe it's not. Maybe you're already there, but it's just a different perspective. But hunt your own way. I'm going to. It's something that,
and maybe find appreciation for someone else's way.
It is. Yeah, it is definitely. So I think we're going to start. We're definitely far down the downhill slope here. And I think what I want to do is just I want to wrap things up a little bit, but a quick review. Again, all we're doing is talking about, if you want to invest in R3 with your own time, or if you want to support an organization that does R3, all we're trying to do is to help frame a perspective. If you are participating in youth recruitment, that is so awesome. But go into it with your eyes wide open, understand what can tip the odds in your favor of actually retaining that young person. And there are different tactics, different strategies than recruiting adults. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different. If you want to get into that adult audience, there's a lot of positive attributes there. They have time, they have money, they can choose what they want to do. They are more easily retained or recruited and retained as hunters through self-help tools. You teach them to hunt, they can restore that hand-me-down tradition of hunting. They can teach their own kids. And so there's a lot of aspects there. So if you're interested in adult recruitment, awesome. Just maybe now you have a more well-rounded perspective. And then I think the message for the underrepresented is be more accommodating. And maybe what we're not saying is you have to do women only programming, or you have to do non-Caucasian programming only. But if that's all that you're doing, maybe look at diversifying those at your events and who you're looking for, because it's going to pay off. It's going to pay off for a more secure future of hunting, I believe. Do you guys agree with that one?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in terms of programming, like you said, sometimes I do appreciate, especially I think where it comes into play a lot. Leigh and I have talked about this in the past, is I think women only programs are necessary in certain cases. I personally would love to see just programs that aren't gender specific or racial specific or anything like that. It's everybody coming together. But there absolutely is, I need to recognize there are comforts that people have if they're with a group that they can feel more affiliated with. And so I think there's need and opportunity for all types of programming out there. And like you said, it's just different, whether it's kids or adults or gender specific or wide open. And I think they all can have their own strengths and places.
That's great. So thank you both so much for your time. I do encourage everyone to check out modcarn.com. Look at all the great resources you guys have there, and the videos that capture some of the work that we've discussed. How about personal contact? Are you guys okay with people reaching out to you?
Sure. Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely.
It's always hard to say your email address and have people retain that, but I guess they can pause it and re-listen. Mark, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if you want to, Leigh, your decision, if you want to do it. Otherwise, people could just reach out to me and I could filter anything over. Mine's easy. It's just mark@modcarn.com.
Sweet.
And that sounds great. If you want to get a hold of me, just get a hold of Mark. He knows where to find me.
That's the easy part. Yeah. Mark@modcarn.com, right? Did I get it right?
Yep. There you go. MARK. Mark with a K.
MARK. So that's awesome. So I can't thank you enough. I think we're going to kind of close this one up. As always, I'm going to give a quick preview about the next podcast. So the next podcast that I have Hank Shaw, who's a wild game chef. He's coming on the podcast. We're going to talk about wild game cooking. And, it's a great R3 subject at the same time. I hear people working in the duck world that ducks are flying liver, right? I've heard that analogy, and I love the taste of duck. And I think most people that call it flying liver, they just didn't know how to cook it. And so, Hank's, we're going to talk about basic cooking. We'll talk about advanced cooking, but I'm personally excited about that one. Hank is a great chef, and I think looking forward to sharing some cool recipes with our listeners.
Yeah, I would say Hank is probably hands down the best wild game chef in the country. And if you haven't checked out his Honest Food website, he's great. So you guys are going to have fun conversation.
That'll be fun. Yeah. So you guys will have to tune into that one. Okay, listeners, if you have any questions, you can reach me at podcast@deltawaterfowl.org. Another easy one, Mark, right? So everybody can remember that. Look forward to hearing any comments, suggestions, things you want to see covered on this podcast. This podcast was one of the longer podcasts, and I anticipated that being so, simply because there's so much to cover. And I think we did a good job. I appreciate it. If you have questions, reach out to me, reach out to Mark, reach out to Leigh. And I guess I'll have to say, until next time, take a new hunter, learn something new, get out of your comfort zone, and be safe and take care. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.